Okay, I'll start. So, I am going to try and get to this the proof of the McDonald eta function identities. But again, I'll go a little slow. First, start with something that's somewhat more familiar. So, the starting point for this eta function identity is really the Weil character formula, and we have already seen this. So, we have the Weil character formula, which tells us something about the character of an irreducible representation. So, for example, if you are looking at the case where the Lie algebra is, say, a finite dimensional complex simple Lie algebra. So, we just look in the finite dimensional situation, with Cartan subalgebra, H and root system and so on. So, all the theory that we have studied, and in this case the Weil character formula tells us that if you compute the formal character, so this denoted as CH of the irreducible representation with highest weight lambda. Okay. What is notation for it again? We have several of them. CH, just lambda here. This is Humphreys' notation, right? Okay. Or so the modules themselves are sometimes, so this is just, so the module is sometimes denoted V lambda, or in the infinite dimensional setup, Raghavan used L lambda, for example. So, these are all of course varying notations for the same thing. It's a highest weight module with highest weight lambda, and the character is given by the Weil character formula, which says it's a sum over the Weil group, an alternating sum. So, this is a sine of W, again sometimes denoted epsilon of W, which is equivalent to -1 raised to the length of W, times some formal exponentials. So, the formal exponentials, again there are tons of notations for those. So, let me just use e raised to the whatever it is I need to put there. So, I am going to say lambda plus rho minus rho, that is on top of the e, and divided by a product of other formal exponentials, where the denominator runs over all the positive roots. So, delta plus is now the set of positive roots of this Lie algebra. Okay. So, that was the Weil character formula, and so again these formal experiments. So, the natural question is, where does this live? What are all these objects? Where does the final answer belong? And so, I mean, independently, what does the left hand side mean? So, the left hand side, again the character of this representation. So, I am going to start using sort of the Katz notation, L lambda for that highest weight module. So, this, remember, the original definition of this object is, it's the generating function which keeps track of the dimensions of the various weight spaces. So, it's a dimension of the weight space, the mu weight space of this module, and then you sort of keep track of it by, so this is over all mu's. Again, yesterday Ravindra Shukla used the notation P of V for the set of all weights of that module, I should say P of L lambda here. So, this is just a set of all weights of this module. So, it's just a generating function. So, again the question is, where does this live? Where does this final answer live? And these formal exponentials you can think of as, they just obey the usual formal rules. So, I am just repeating some of these things. So, mu, for example, which appears there, is an element of, again what was variously denoted as lambda or p and so on, the weight lattice. So, this is just the weight lattice of this Lie algebra G, and so again these things just these formal exponentials therefore can be thought of as a basis. So, this is nothing but a basis, a basis over the field of complex numbers for what's called the group algebra or the group ring of the weight lattice. Okay. So, this is where all the action is taking place inside the group ring of the weight lattice over the complex numbers, and this recall is more or less the definition. You form all these formal exponentials, one for each element of lambda, and then you define rules of addition and multiplication. So, they multiply by saying e to the mu 1 times e to the mu 2 is e to the mu 1 plus mu 2, right? The way exponentials would multiply, and addition is just formal addition. E to the mu 1 plus e to the mu 2 is just e to the mu 1 plus e to the mu 2. It is just that new symbol. Okay. So, it is sort of the free vector space that you can form on these symbols given, and the multiplication is the key thing. Okay. So, that is where all these things live. The character of L lambda by its definition lives there, and you can notice that these things on top and bottom also live in the same space. This is in the C of lambda, and that is also in C of lambda, and what we are doing is now, it is a ring C of lambda. I am sorry, why? Right, okay. So, at least as it stands, so okay. So, at the moment, at least the numerator and denominator certainly belong to C of lambda, right. So, here I am only worried about the finite dimensional simple Lie algebra. So, I am thinking of the top as an element of C lambda and the bottom as an element of C lambda. They are just finite linear combinations, and in some sense you can say that the content of the Weil character formula. So, notice that the left hand side is again just a finite sum. It is an element of C lambda. It says that this denominator divides the numerator. So, this numerator is the product of this denominator and this finite sum inside C lambda, for example. But an alternate point of view would be to think of instead of just finite sums, to allow for power series, to allow for sort of infinite sums. So, there you would expand 1 over 1 minus e to the minus alpha as 1 plus e to the minus alpha plus e to the minus 2 alpha and so on. You would just use the geometric series, and think of this in that case as living inside the ring of formal power series. So, I will not throw a notation for it, but it is not quite C lambda, it is bigger than C lambda. You also have to allow infinite sums of these e mu's, okay, certain kinds of infinite sums where these alphas sort of decrease. And if you take that point of view, then this object here is an element of that power series ring, and then the content of the Weil character formula in some sense is what you are doing is each term. So, it is a sum over several things, each of which is a power series, an alternating sum of various power series, and the Weil character formula says eventually that this alternating sum of power series is only a finite polynomial. So, it is only a finite series in the end, meaning to say there is so much cancellation in the power series that all terms beyond a point become 0. Okay. So, that would be the content, I mean one of the implications of the Weil character formula if you take that point of view. Okay. So, that is where all the action is taking place, and the simplest example of the simplest case of the Weil character formula would be when lambda equals 0. So, this is the case of interest for us. Let us take example, let us take lambda to be the weight 0. So, notice that is in fact a dominant weight. So, remember the representation theory of our Lie algebra says that corresponding to each dominant weight you have got such an irreducible module. So, I should have picked lambda dominant, but 0 certainly is dominant, right. So, therefore, this is in fact a bona fide representation, and when lambda equals 0, I actually know what this highest weight representation is. Okay. So, this is an irreducible representation of the Lie algebra with highest weight 0. Okay. And so, what should that be? Just a trivial representation. Okay. So, here is one way of saying this. You sort of identify a candidate, right. Look at the trivial representation is something on which the entire Lie algebra acts by 0, and that basis vector that you would have here would be a highest weight vector for the highest weight 0, and then by the uniqueness of these highest weight representations. Here's a candidate which has the correct highest weight. I mean, it's the highest weight representation of the correct highest weight, and therefore that must in fact equal L of 0. Okay. So when I write just C, I mean with the trivial action, everything acting by 0. Okay. So it's a one-dimensional representation, and so one can of course apply the Weil character formula. The advantage now being we also know the left hand side, we also independently know what the character of L lambda is. So observe, character of L lambda, what would it be? Let us apply this definition. We had to look at all the weight spaces, first decompose the representation into weight spaces, right. So you see what are all the weights which appear. So what are all the weights which appear here? Just one weight 0, right. There is only one weight space, one dimensional weight space corresponding to the weight 0. There are no other weights which appear. And you must form this generating series over all weights, dimension of that weight space times e to the mu. So it's just 1 times e to the 0. That's the only thing you get. Okay. So that's the formal character of the trivial module. I keep forgetting to write 0 here. Whereas the Weil character formula would say that this is also the same as, so okay, again in this ring when we have e to the 0, that's the same as 1. Okay, that's the identity, the multiplicative identity in this ring. Now the Weil character formula therefore says that this sum over all w, whatever we have, minus 1 to the blah 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 over product over all positive roots must equal 1, where 1 by 1 I mean of course this guy e to the 0. So here's a corollary to the Weil character formula, and Sendamari sort of did this. This is what you would get, to which equates, therefore it says that the top equals the bottom, right. So that's often called the Weil denominator formula. Here's the Weil denominator identity for a finite dimensional Lie algebra. Says the sum over the Weil group minus 1 to the length of w e to the w rho minus rho must equal product 1 minus okay, and here again I am assuming G is finite dimensional simple Lie algebra with Weil group w and root system delta. Okay. So here's the Weil denominator identity. You can think of it as just saying that the character of the trivial module is just 1. Okay. Now the sort of the first observation to make is that if you were only worried about the denominator identity, I mean if for example you wanted to make sense out of this identity here, you don't really need Lie algebras. For example, yeah,
minus sigma alpha,
alpha
r plus w, that was given as an exercise.
That was one, yeah, I'm sort of going to mention that right very soon. Okay. So this equality here, to make sense out of this equality, you don't really need to bring Lie algebras into the picture, right. Let's just look at what are all the things which go into this equation. You could sort of make sense out of this in one step earlier if you were only worried about root systems, for example, right. So for example, right after all that stuff we did in the first week about root systems, we can at least formulate this. So let's see, how would you formulate this in terms of a root system? So you would say, okay, let's do the following. Let's take a root system delta. Okay, instead of R, now we use delta to be in sync with the Lie algebra notation. Let delta be a root system. Let's say a reduced root system. Okay, which means remember it's sitting inside some vector space V. That's how we define this root system, and with Weil group. So as soon as you have a root system, you have a Weil group, and let's say there is a form, and we also saw the Weil group being finite implies there is an invariant form, and let this be W invariant, let's say positive definite form form on V. Okay. Now, given this data, you can already make sense out of this identity, okay, because the one side just involves all the positive roots of your root system, right. So, you can just work inside this vector space V. It says take the product over all the positive roots of your root system. On the other hand, it says take the while group W and then just compute this particular product. So, for example, let's think of, I mean, okay, as an example, let's for example take G2, which is a at least I would say to me it's really a root system. The Lie algebra is not so visible, right, because we never really constructed it beyond generators and relations and so on. It's not one of the SL or SP or SO and so on, which are classical. You have a handle on those. G2 for now is really an abstract root system. So, here's a root, here's the guy at 150 degrees, here's something at 120, here's a thing at 90, 60 and 30. Those are the positive roots, right. Of course, I'm not drawing the negatives, they're also there. So, that is the G2 positive part of the G2 root system, and so this is saying if you took this two dimensional vector space, so let us call these two roots as alpha 1 and alpha 2, the two simple roots, then if you formed this product, right, for example, look at the product on the right hand side, it looked like 1 minus e to the minus alpha 1, 1 minus e to the minus alpha 2, those are the two simple roots. This root is alpha 2 plus alpha 1, so there are 6 roots, so it is alpha 2 plus alpha 1, alpha 2 plus 2 alpha 1, that is this one, this is alpha 2 plus 3 alpha 1, that is 2 alpha 2 alpha 2 plus 3 alpha 1, I guess, okay. It's the sum of these two and so on. So, essentially you get the idea, there are 6 terms and I just need to multiply all these formal exponentials out and I will finally get some expression involving e to the minus alpha 1 and e to the minus alpha 2. It's a finite sum of products of those things. So, that is the left hand side or that is the product side, the right hand side. And now on the left hand side, I sort of have an expression involving this thing called rho, right. And you could of course say that rho somehow seems to be this ingredient which is not quite the something we saw in the root system world, but again we have several descriptions of rho which make its connection to root systems clear. We know, for example, it is half the sum of the positive roots, and therefore that would still make perfect sense here, right. You just need to add all these things up and take half of that and see what vector you get, and then just apply each while group element on that row and then subtract rho, and you will get some linear combination of alpha 1 and alpha 2. So, this identity says doing it either this way or that way gives you the same answer. And so, coming to Sendamari's remark, there is another characterization of rho which I think is one of the tutorial sheets, which says, well, there are two other characterizations. So, you can also think of rho in two other ways. One, well, it is that element, here I am just thinking of it in terms of the root system, it is that element of V which has the property that rho with alpha I check is 1 for all I, and if sort of the checks are sort of bothering you, equivalently 2 rho alpha I over alpha I alpha I. So, remember, evaluating a check is nothing but 2 alpha I over alpha I, taking the inner product with that is 1 for all I, for all the simple roots. So, rho is that element which satisfies this equation, and there is always a unique such element because the alpha i's are of course a basis for this vector space. So, you are saying rho is that element whose inner product with each alpha I is this number alpha I divided by 2. So, you are specifying the inner product with each basis vector and you will always find a vector with those inner products. So, rho can be defined using this relation, and sort of also observe the following important fact that the W rho minus rho. So, if you notice, the rho by itself does not appear in this equation. Okay. What appears in this equation is this particular combination W rho minus rho. That is also what appears in the Weil character formula, for example. I mean, I had W of lambda plus rho minus rho. So, that is there is a W lambda and then there is a W rho minus rho. So, it always appears as that particular combination. That is a crucial observation. And this guy, even though rho in itself seems like an extraneous thing to a root system, in some way, W rho minus rho is very much intrinsic to the root system. It says, well, here's the exercise in the tutorial sheet. It says W rho minus rho is actually the following. You know, we have seen another exercise which says, if you look at the set of all positive roots, alpha, say alpha is a positive root, then we had a characterization of the length of an element. The length is the number of positive roots which are mapped to negative roots by that Weil group element. So you take all positive roots which are mapped to negative roots by W inverse, okay, and you sum all those elements up. So how many elements would you have here? Well, the number of summands is the length of W inverse, and that's the same as the length of W, for example. But it says W rho minus rho is the negative sum of these things. Okay, so it's intrinsically tied to that element W. Somehow this combination is a, it's a signature of W somehow. It tells you, find all those positive roots which become negative under W inverse, add them all up, that's exactly W rho minus rho. Okay. Okay. Sorry. Thank you. W inverse alpha belonging to delta minus, right? The positives which become negative under W inverse. And then you must sort of do a minus of that. So observe, in particular, W rho minus rho is always a negative sum of the positive roots. I mean, it's when you write it in terms of the simple roots, all the coefficients will be negative. Okay, so it will actually become a combination of e to the minus alphas, e to the minus alpha i's, as it should, because observe, the right hand side only consists of terms of the form e to the minus alphas when you multiply it out. So the left hand side had better also consist of such terms. Okay, anyway, so these are the sort of the observations about rho, and I just wanted to, as a sort of, before jumping into the affine case, I just wanted to use the Weil denominator identity for the case of the root system AN or the Lie algebra SLN. So so I'm going to now do the example of the Weil denominator formula for the Lie algebra SLN, or if you prefer to think in terms of root systems, the root system is just the root system which we called AN minus 1. It's the root system of AN minus 1. Okay, so I'm just going to do it in terms of root systems. Okay, not so much means the equivalent, but since we worked that out in full, let's do it in terms of root systems. So remember, the root system is given as follows. You start with Rn with basis epsilon 1 through epsilon n, standard orthonormal basis, and let's call the standard form on Rn by that. And the vector space V, the ambient vector space for the root system, was the span of, we could describe it as all vectors whose coefficients sum to 0, okay, and the root system itself, the elements of delta were all the fellows of the form epsilon I minus epsilon j, where I was not equal to j. And the positive, so remember here, to carry out this computation, we also need to know what the positive roots are. So here the positive roots, so again we did this before, we chose them, we said we could always choose them like this, epsilon I minus epsilon j, where I is less than j. Okay, so those are the positive roots. Now what are the other ingredients we need? We need the Weil group, and again something that we saw, the Weil group, you can think of it as doing the following. It acts on the ambient space Rn. So the Weil group turns out to be isomorphic to the symmetric group Sn, right, acting on the ambient space Rn by permuting the epsilon i's. So how did it act? By you take an element of Sn, how does it act on epsilon I? It gives you whatever epsilon sigma I. I'm thinking of sigma as an element of Sn. There is such an action of Sn on Rn, and that's exactly how the Weil group acts, except here I should restrict it to that space V if I want to understand how the Weil group acts on the ambient space of the root system. But when we did this in full, you can as well, there is no loss in thinking of it as acting on the Rn space, because these two things are really isomorphic, because on that extra dimension in Rn it just acts as identity. So there is nothing new that you are adding by doing this. Okay, so these are all the ingredients we need. We have them all lined up, so we will just plug into the formula. Okay, so no, I don't really have one thing, which is rho. So I need to figure out what rho is in this case, right? So I have everything except this while vector rho. So rho, remember, was defined. So what is rho now? Okay, it was defined by the requirement that, let me use this one here. So here notice all these roots, all the simple roots have norm 2, because they are all of the form epsilon I minus epsilon j. So I can forget that 2 part. So what is rho? Well, rho is defined by the requirement that it should have inner product 1 with all the simple roots. And observe, these were the simple roots in this case, right? The ones differences of consecutive epsilons. So rho with epsilon I minus epsilon I plus 1 should be 1 for all I going from 1 through n minus 1, yeah. That is how rho is defined. It has to have inner product 1 with the simple roots, because here the roots are all of norm 2, so I can forget that extra factor. Okay, question, what is an element which does this? It's easiest to just sort of manufacture it. So here's the definition of rho. I should ensure its coefficient of epsilon I is 1 more than its coefficient on epsilon I plus 1. So we'll start with the end. So I'll say it's 0 times epsilon n plus 1 times epsilon n minus 1 plus 2 times epsilon n minus 2 and so on, till I get to n minus 1 epsilon 1. Okay, so you get the idea. I started with 0, I just kept increasing the coefficients one at a time till I landed up at n minus 1. And now, of course, if I compute, so I manufacture and then I check it has the correct property. The rho with epsilon I minus epsilon I plus 1 is of course 1 for all n, right? Okay, excellent. That was going to be my next question. So observe, rho has the correct property, but it's not an element of V, right? Because the sum of the coefficients is not quite 0. Okay, so now that's sort of the beauty of this whole thing. It doesn't really matter. Okay, so that half sum of positive roots is sort of a red herring in some sense. It's accidental, but it's not terribly essential to what goes on. Rho doesn't even need to be in V. Right? Here I expand V, think of a larger space, and find some rho there whose inner product is 1 with all these vectors. Now this is sort of the key thing to remember. Remember, rho is sort of in this bigger space, right? So rho has a component along this extra dimension. But remember, rho is not the thing which appears in my formulas. It's W rho minus rho. Okay. Now what will happen is that the W rho and the rho, the W will not change that component which is outside, for example, right? And so W rho minus rho will still be the same thing no matter which choice I make of rho. So there are several choices of rho that I can make if I want to choose rho in R to the n rather than in V. And every one of those choices will give me the exact same answer here, because W rho minus rho will turn out to be the same. Okay. So again, exercise. So to sort of reiterate what I just said, this is the key exercise you need to do to see why this is the case. If rho, so here's the correct formulation, if rho is any vector, even in Rn in this case, which satisfies this property for all the simple roots, then if you compute W rho minus rho, it will always turn out to be this thing. Okay, that's the key thing. And here the only property you use is the fact that it has inner product 1 for all the simple roots. And it does not use the fact that it's half the sum of the simple roots or that it belongs to V and so on. And just as an example, let me just demonstrate this. For example, if I take W to be, say, a simple reflection S alpha I, and let's compute W rho minus rho. So when you do S alpha I rho minus rho, but observe S alpha I rho, we have a formula for it. It's rho minus rho alpha I check alpha I. That's this reflection, and then I subtract the rho from it. So it gives me minus, and this number is 1 by definition. Okay, so W rho minus rho, when you do this calculation for this particular W, the answer turns out to be minus alpha I. And notice I never used anything about rho other than the fact that rho alpha I check is 1. This is all that went into the calculation, nothing else was used. And of course, it's the same as this right hand side, because W inverse is S alpha I, and we had a proposition which said S alpha I only maps alpha I to a negative guy. It keeps all the remaining positives as positives, and therefore it will give you minus of alpha I as the answer, okay, as it should. Correct. No, but I'm sort of, you're right. In this case, you can actually argue like that. Correct. Correct. But in this case, right? In that case for the Rn. But I'm sort of saying all this because, you know, to sort of also, I'm going to use this also in the affine case in some sense. So as you know, as Raghavan pointed out, there were several possibilities for rho even in the affine case. Okay, so when you go to the infinite dimensional thing, it becomes a natural setting there, that there is no, you know, unique choice of rho that you can make because there's too much freedom. There's one whole extra dimension there, but it doesn't matter. That vector rho only needs to satisfy this property, that it is one with all the simple rules. And if it does that, then automatically all these things work. The other key observation being that W rho minus rho is the key thing which enters the formula, not rho itself. Okay, so great, we have one candidate for rho, and this will turn out to be a convenient candidate. We have just said it doesn't matter what candidate you choose, the left hand side of the formula will be the same. Okay, so let's apply this. So let's plug in. Let's see which way do I want to do it. Let's compute the right hand side first. So I know the positive roots of this root system. That's all goes into the right hand side. It's therefore product over all I less than j of 1 minus e to the minus epsilon I minus epsilon j. Okay. So that's the right hand side of this, or the product side of the wild character formula. Okay. Fine. I haven't really done much. Now let's look at the left hand side. So okay, let me also do the following to this formula. Just, you know, I wrote it this way because to emphasize the fact that W rho minus rho is the key thing, but let me push the e to the rho over to the other side. The equation is still the same. I haven't done anything to it. So let me put the e to the rho on the other side because it makes for easier comparison. So therefore the right hand side is e to the rho times this product. Okay. Now, so let's see what are all the, you know, I want to sort of make this a little simpler. Rho itself is given by that formula there. So if I write this out, it will be some things with e to the various epsilons occurring in it. Okay. So let me make my life a little simpler. As I said before, all this action is taking place in, you know, the weight lattice, the group algebra of the weight lattice and so on. So let me give these. So there are sort of some, the independent variables in some sense are these fellows. So let's call this e to the epsilon I. So I'm just renaming my variables to make it easier. So remember, wherever I see e to the epsilon I will call it zi. Okay, so I have manufactured n variables. So let's write this in terms of the z's, becomes easier. So let's see, what does the e to the rho become? What's the term in front? Rho is this. E to the rho is z1 raised to the n minus 1, z2 raised to the n minus 2, and so on till zn minus 1 raised to the 1. There is no zn there, right? Times the product over all I less than j of 1 minus z Zi or Zj? Zj divided by Zi. Right? It's 1 minus Zj over Zi over all I less than j. Okay, and then there's a factor in front. So what do I get when I sort of clear these denominators and cancel and so on? What? So observe there are no denominators left, because if you see how many times the denominator Zi would appear here, when I clear, imagine I am clearing denominators, a Zi I will accrue, I will incur a Zi if for every I which is less than j, in every pair where the I is smaller. But then there are n minus 1 pairs where I is smaller, right? 1, 2, 1, 3, 1, 4 till 1 n. Similarly, 2 will occur on the, Z2 will occur on the bottom in the pairs 2, 3, 2, 4, 2, 5 and so on. So the number of times the Zi's occur on the bottom are exactly these numbers. And so they of course cancel, and you're just left with this product. Okay, so that's the reason why I took the e to the rho to the left hand side. So let's compute the sum side of this identity. So the other side, left hand side, is now sum over all elements of the while group. Remember, the while group is now just a group Sn, and sort of just for psychological purposes, let me call it sigma instead of W. Okay, I'm thinking of it as some permutation of the numbers. So sigma ranging over the while group minus 1 to the length of sigma. So this is the sine of sigma. So let's call it sine sigma. And what do I have? E to the W rho. Okay. So what is E to the W rho going to become in terms of the Z's? Or E to the sigma rho. So imagine I must do this. But sigma acting on rho is sigma, what is rho? It was n minus 1 epsilon 1. So this is sigma of epsilon 1 plus n minus 2 epsilon sigma 2 and so on. Right? I take rho, I apply sigma to it, and this is the kind of thing I get. And then E to the epsilons becomes Z's. So now if I convert this into Z, convince yourself that here's what I will get. Okay. So if I put all these things in, the variables will be Z sigma 1, Z sigma 2, Z sigma 3 will occur to the powers n minus 1, n minus 2, n minus 3 and so on. Okay. Is this fine? So that's what I get here. Okay, great. So get rid of this. Now here's a question: where have you seen expressions like these before? Okay, this is a determinant. So if you see this right hand side and ask yourself, what expression is this? Where has one seen an expression like this before? Recall, if A is an n cross n matrix. If A is an n cross n matrix, how do you compute its determinant? Well, you do the following. You run over all permutations of n. You put the sign of sigma in front, and then you say it's A 1 in the first row. You pick sigma column, sigma 1, A times A2 sigma 2, and so on. A n sigma n. Right? That's how you would compute a determinant in the full expansion of the determinant looks like that. And so of course this looks very much like a determinant. We just got to figure out what matrix. So this is like saying, okay, this is the first row entry. Comparing with this, the first row sigma 1th entry must be this. Second row sigma 2th entry is this. So what are the elements of the first row? Well, they are just Z1 to the n minus 1, Z2 to the n minus 1, Zn to the n minus 1. That's the first row. Right? From the first row I pick the sigma 1th entry. From the second row I pick the sigma 2th entry, which means the second row looks like Z1 to the n minus 2. Till the final row just is a string of 1s. Okay? And of course, we know what this is. This is what you would call the Vandermonde matrix. Okay. So, it is the determinant of the Vandermonde matrix. That is the sum side of the identity. The product side of the identity is the very familiar answer for what the determinant is. It is just a product over all Zi minus Zj where I is less than j, right. So, the while denominator formula, when you apply it to SLN, is nothing but the expansion of the, it's the formula for the Vandermonde determinant. Okay, so I sort of wanted to make a few points. So, the main one being that rho, somehow the choice does not really matter because it is only W rho minus rho that enters all these equations. Okay, great. So, now let me sort of try and do this calculation in the case of the affine Kac-Moody algebra or the affine Lie algebras. Okay, so affine Kac-Moody. And here I want to do, so I am just going to repeat all these steps, but again I am going to do one example before I sort of try and give you the most general version of it, which is that of the simplest affine Lie algebra, which is what you call affine SL2. Okay. So, let us first look at what the denominator identity is. So, before which, so recall again, so if I am talking about affine Kac-Moody algebra, I have an exact same formula, right, that Raghavan did, that is the Kac-Weil character formula in this case, but it looks exactly like the Weil character formula. So, let us write the formula first and then we will figure out what the various ingredients mean. So, the Weil Kac character formula says the following, the character of L lambda, again as in the finite dimensional case, is now the sum over all elements of the Weil group, sign of that element, e to the W rho minus rho, product 1 minus e to the minus alpha, so that's the Weil Kac character formula. Now, it looks almost exactly like just the usual Weil character formula. So, this is when G is any symmetrizable Kac-Moody algebra, right, in particular for all these affine Kac-Moody algebras. Now, the only new ingredient is this thing called mult alpha. Yes, of course. Thanks. So, I am looking at the general character formula, not just for the case lambda equals 0. So, that would be the thing, and now there is a multiplicity of alpha on the bottom. There is also this thing called delta plus here, right. Now, all these various notions, one just needs to figure out what they are in this affine case and how they change and so on. So, W of course is just the Weil group. So, here recall, so what is G? G I am going to think of as an affine Kac-Moody algebra, for which I will, I am going to apply that formula, but recall what was that? That was constructed starting from a finite dimensional simple Lie algebra by this process. This is a concrete construction using the formula for the co-cycle and so on. There was also this more abstract construction using just those generators and relations and going modulo that ideal R tilde and so on. So, that is the abstract construction of this object, which also works for any other matrix, the generalized Cartan matrix. But the affine Kac-Moody algebra is, well, what is it? It's the Lie algebra that would result if you did that general abstract construction with generators and relations for the matrix A, which is obtained as Raghavan sort of did in the very first lecture on this, the affines, which is you have what is called the extended Cartan matrix. So, for example, if suppose A naught is the Cartan matrix of the finite dimensional Lie algebra, for example, this is the Cartan matrix simplest Cartan matrix for SL2, right? It's just a 1 cross 1 matrix, which is just 2. Then the extended affine Cartan matrix A is given by this prescription, which says you do the following. So the A0, so you think of putting A0 here and adding one more sort of row and column. So where we sort of did this again yesterday. There's alpha 0, this is minus theta, and there's alpha 1 through alpha n or alpha L. Then on this side you think of taking these functionals and evaluating them on minus theta check, minus plus alpha 1 check through alpha L check. Whenever you see a check, you can change that to 2 times that over its norm. Okay. So you take these guys and you evaluate on these fellows. So the key new ingredient is you take the underlying finite dimensional algebra, you look for its highest root, take the negative of that highest root, and you see what you get when you evaluate that highest root on all these simple roots in some sense. For example, if you did that prescription that we have sort of worked out in great detail in those cases, for the SL2, then here is the matrix you would get. If you start with the Cartan matrix of SL2, the extended Cartan matrix is this fellow, 2 minus 2 minus 2, 2. Okay. The reason is easy to see. The highest root, there is only one root. I mean, SL2 has alpha and minus alpha. Highest root is therefore alpha, and minus of that is minus alpha. So when you compute, so it's like you have an alpha here and a minus alpha here. Okay, and that sort of explains this 2 minus 2 business. You're just looking at alpha and minus alpha and seeing what inner products result when you do 2 times this, that over the norm and so on. So that's the extended matrix, and if you did it for SL3 as Raghavan again did yesterday, you would get you had 2 minus 1 minus 1 2, and then you will have a bigger matrix with more minus 1s in it and so on. Anyway, so this is the matrix which I will soon need. So anyway, this is just again a review of what the matrix of this affine is, but that abstract construction eventually leads to this concrete matrix, this concrete Lie algebra, okay, and we will really only work with this. And so the various aspects that we needed are, well, let's see, what are the things we need for this formula? We need the while group, we need the set of roots, we need to know what positive roots mean, we need to know what multiplicities are. Okay. If we have them, we are done. Well, we need rho as well. Okay, so let's just say what all these things are. So first thing, what is the affine while group? The first thing we need. We also need to understand what the roots look like and what the positive roots look like. We also need to understand what does multiplicity mean. Right? So let's see, affine while group. Okay. Now do we understand the affine while group? Well, in some sense yes, because we know how it, what it is in terms of the finite while group. So this is the thing that we did. The affine while group can be thought of as this semi-direct product of W naught with this new sort of abelian group T, which will play a very important role in this whole thing, where T, remember, was just the translation group of a certain lattice. It was sort of isomorphic to some lattice and the additive group of some lattice. Okay, what are the roots? The set of all roots, again, this is something that we have done. They look like, I should call these alpha maybe, alpha plus n delta, where alpha is a root. So all these are, you want to understand each of these objects in terms of their corresponding finite dimensional counterparts. So the affine roots are the finite roots plus n delta. N can be any integer. Okay, that's only one set of them. Those are the real roots, if you remember. And you also have the imaginary roots, which turn out to be just multiples of delta, integer multiples other than 0. Those are the set of all roots. Okay. Now, So, one way of sort of picturing this is, for example, imagine you are in say SL3. So, you have this underlying finite root system which has these 3 positive roots and these 3 negative roots. So, those are the alphas for that is the root system of SL3. So, imagine this is delta naught is the root system of SL3, and now I am forming the affinization of SL3, right. I am constructing this affine Lie algebra, and this prescription. Thank you. Okay. So, this prescription tells us what the positive, what all the roots are. So, it says something like, so let me color these separately. Those are the 3 negative roots. Now, what what do all the roots look like? Let us forget the imaginary for now. They look like alpha plus n delta over all n and z. So, one way of thinking about it is to say, well, here is sort of, imagine this is sitting on the xy plane. Now, for every integer, so think of there are several translates of the xy plane in various places. Okay, so that is alpha plus delta, for example, where alpha is this guy. So, of course, I get this, I get this. So, I have one copy of this root system here, I have a copy here. This is alpha plus 2 deltas. Then I have alpha minus delta, alpha minus 2 delta, and so on. Okay. So, imagine this is all this is the stuff in the minus delta, minus 2 delta, this is plus delta, plus 2 delta. And if you actually wanted to know what delta was, well, delta is just the midpoints. So, for example, this is 0, which is not a root, but 0 plus delta, which is this guy, is in fact a root. So, this is delta, this is 2 delta, and so on. Those are also roots. So, I should also sort of color the circles in the middle. Okay. So, this is some kind of picture of the root system of the affine Kac-Moody algebra. There are several copies of this. Here 0 in the finite dimensional setup is not counted as a root. Okay, that is the Cartan subalgebra, not counted as a root, but in all higher and lower planes it is a root. It is in fact the n delta fellows. Okay. So, that is the root system. So, now the question is, how do you split them into positives and negatives, right? And well, here is sort of the most commonsensical thing. The most obvious choice is, well, everything that corresponds to delta, 2 delta, 3 delta, and so on will be deemed positive. Okay, all these planes above are positive roots. Everything minus delta, minus 2 delta, and so on are called negative roots. Okay, and you sort of only need to break ties on the plane itself, but that came with the God-given notion of positive and negative, right? These were the positives and those were already negative. So, here we already have a split between positive and negative. So, you call this positive and those negative. Okay. So, that is the thing. These planes and those planes are completely clear. Only on this original roots do you have to worry, and there it is just the original positives and negatives. Okay. So, that is the definition of positive and negative roots. So, let us just write this out. Positive roots would therefore, so you have to be slightly careful. So, let us write the obvious ones. They look like alpha plus n delta. Okay, let me write n delta. Let me write the very obvious ones first. N delta, n at least 1. Those are the imaginary roots. Now, to this I need to, so let me see. So, if I take alpha a positive root of the finite root system, then alpha plus all multiples of delta would be roots, right, for every n greater than or equal to 0. So, let me write it like this. Provided alpha was chosen to be a positive root of the the finite root system. Okay. So, notice I have sort of silently included 0 there. If n is 1, then alpha itself is of course a positive root, right. This is what happens on the xy plane, and of course above it all those are positive. So, those are positives, and the negative. So, if instead of alpha I had, say I take minus alpha, where alpha is again positive, which means I am looking at these things colored blue, those themselves are not positive, right. They are all considered negative on this plane, but everything above is positive. So, there I should just do minus alpha plus n delta, again n is at least 1. Okay. So, this is the full description of the positive roots. So, that is the other ingredient we need in order to compute the denominator, which is fine so far. And the multiplicities, now what do we know about the multiplicities themselves? In the finite dimensional setup, all multiplicities are 1. Okay. Now, here it is not quite the case. The multiplicities are however still 1 if alpha is a real root. Okay. So, multiplicity of alpha is 1 if alpha is a root of the form, so let us probably call it beta. If beta is a real root, meaning to say beta is of the form alpha plus n delta for some alpha root of the underlying finite fellow. Okay. For real roots, multiplicity is 1, and what is left are the n deltas, the imaginary roots. So, if beta is n delta, what is the multiplicity? It is the dimension of the underlying Cartan subalgebra. Okay. And how do we, it's not magic, we sort of already know what the root spaces are. So, remember all this came from explicitly decomposing this root space. So, recall that when you take the Lie algebra n and ask for its n delta Lie algebra G and find its n delta root space, that was the following: you take the underlying finite Cartan and you take tensor T to the n. Okay. So, recall this is how that root space was constructed. I mean, we sort of gave this prescription and then checked that in fact it was, it was a simultaneous eigenvector for the action of H and so on with the correct eigenvalue n delta. So, this root space is this guy, therefore, the dimension is the dimension of the underlying Cartan subalgebra. Okay. So, which we call L. So, this is L, which is nothing but the rank of the underlying finite dimensional Lie algebra, or equivalently the dimension of the underlying Cartan subalgebra, the finite Cartan. Okay. So, this is all. So, even though you do have multiplicities, it is not a wildly varying function of alpha, it is either one of these two values. It is usually 1 except for the n deltas where it turns out to be L. Okay. So, I want to work out now one more example in this case, which is that of affine SL2. So, all the ingredients in general are laid out, but let us work out the example of what happens if you start with affine SL2. So, I am just going to take G naught to be SL2, and therefore, I will take the corresponding affine Lie algebra, which is SL2 Okay. And now, in this case, I know all those numbers. For example, what is the multiplicity of n delta? What is the dimension of the underlying Cartan? It is just 1, right, because SL2 only has that H as the Cartan subalgebra. So, in fact, here all roots have multiplicity 1. Right? It is a special situation. For SL2 alone it happens, or SL2 affine it happens, everything has multiplicity 1. Okay. And of course, the roots again are easy to describe. There is only one root which we usually call alpha or alpha 1, for example. So, there is alpha 1 plus n minus 1 delta or minus alpha 1 plus n delta. Those are the real roots. Okay. And Okay, so maybe the product side. So let me start with the product side of this formula. So in this case, we know what everything is. So let's say with let's say its roots are, let's call the minus alpha 1 and alpha 1. Okay, so that now I know what the real roots look like. So let me now work out the while denominator formula. For this Lie algebra G. So though I didn't quite say what the while denominator formula is, it's the exact same, it's the analog of what happens in the finite dimensional setup. If I take the lambda here to be a 0, so if I take the trivial or the 0 highest weight, then the formula becomes this. Okay, now this would be called well, okay, it's still the character formula for the trivial module, and as before, the highest weight, the trivial, you again do the same thing. You take that candidate, the trivial module, and you see it's obviously reducible, and you see what the highest weight corresponds to, and there it corresponds to the highest weight 0. So it must be L0, and therefore the character of the trivial module is a 1, which equals this numerator or denominator. So the numerator equals the denominator. It's exact same thing, no change there. So let's see what the while denominator formula would become for this particular Lie algebra G. So in particular, I'm going to work out the product side of the identity. So the product side of the denominator formula would just be these guys. Okay, and now we know what all the roots are. So let's write this out. This will now become, so it's a product n greater than or equal to 1. Okay, so I just wrote the roots out. They are of the form n delta. So let me put them in first. 1 minus e to the minus n delta. Those are the imaginary roots, and they all occur with multiplicity 1. So here I don't need to worry, it's just raised to the 1 here. Okay. Okay, so let's see what's next. I have alpha plus n minus 1 delta, right, where alpha is a positive root, so I need to throw that in. It's 1 minus e to the minus of alpha plus n minus 1 delta, alpha 1. Okay, again I am running n from 1 throughout, times the third kind of root is e to the minus alpha plus n delta. Okay, so this is the product side of the identity. I have sort of lined up all three types of roots: the imaginary ones, the ones which lie above the alpha 1, and the ones which lie above the minus alpha 1. But there is this slight change. The ones above alpha 1 starts at 0. The ones which lie above minus alpha 1 will only start with n equals 1, right, because of the way the positive roots and the negative roots were split. Okay, so now as before, like I did in the example of a n minus 1, so let's sort of rename these variables so that we just get an idea of how many independent variables there are, and what we can write these in terms of. So how many independent variables are these? There are all these formal exponentials, but this action is taking place and there are two independent variables. There is either e to the minus alpha 1, right, or e to the alpha 1, whichever, and the other one is e to the delta. So if I call these two as two variables, then I can rewrite this in terms of those two variables. So conventionally, here's what we do. Let's call q as e to the delta and z e to the minus alpha 1. So those are the two variables we have. And so let's plug those two variables in. Let's do it here. Therefore, this becomes product. It's 1 minus q to the n, 1 minus z. Let me see if I want z or z inverse. So e to the minus alpha 1 is z. Okay, 1 minus z q to the n minus 1, 1 minus z inverse q to the n. Okay, because this e to the plus alpha 1 becomes a z inverse, and e to the minus n delta is of course q to the n, right? And of course, we saw this before. Right? So, this is just the product side of the Jacobi triple product identity. Okay. So, and that also sort of naturally explains why this you know funny exponents here, why this there is a term here which looks like 1 minus z. Remember, that was causing our problems when we attempted to put z equals 1. So, it is 1 minus z because the positive roots start with alpha 1 itself. On the 0 plane, alpha 1 is counted as positive, and then you sort of keep going up. So, there will be a term corresponding to e to the alpha 1 here, whereas the negative roots only start from the one plane above, right? Minus alpha 1 plus delta onwards are negative or positive roots, and therefore, even though you have a z inverse, it starts only from q square, q cubed, and so on. So, this funny occurrence of the powers of z and q are sort of explained naturally when you think in terms of the real roots of the corresponding root system. Okay, that is the product side. So, all we need to do is just figure out what the sum side looks like and check that indeed we do get the sum side of the Jacobi triple product identity. And so, to do this, we need to sort of unravel what the while group looks like, right. So, we need to figure out what the while group is in this case. So, we need to write the action of the while group, we need to act it on W, right, and we need to figure out how it, well, what is that thing times rho minus rho. So, that is, I suppose, the thing to do. Okay, so, let us attempt to do this. So, the while group, remember, is W naught semi-direct product T. T was, how was T defined? It consisted of all elements of the form T gamma, where gamma was an element of M, which was nothing but the long root lattice. Okay. But in this case, there is only alpha 1 and minus alpha 1 are the only roots, and long root lattice is the same as just the usual root lattice, all integer multiples of alpha 1. In general, you would have to take theta, the highest root, look at all its while conjugates, the while orbit of theta, and take the lattice spanned by that. That is what we call the long root lattice. Here it is just z alpha 1. And T consisted of this, and remember, we had that formula for how T gamma acted, because we are going to need that formula. Okay. So, let us see, what do we need to compute? The sum side of the identity of the while denominator formula, remember, looks like this. You need to sum over all elements of the while group, the affine while group now, minus 1 to the length of that element, so the sign of that element, times E W rho minus rho. Okay, so let us do this. So, what is, by the way, what is W0 in this case? The finite while group, the root system is just, what's the root system of SL2? It just has alpha 1 and minus alpha 1. And so, this finite while group only consists of these two elements, 1 and S alpha 1. It's a group generated by this one reflection, but its square is identity. So, it only has two elements. It's just the the reflection about the origin. So, that is W naught, and T is right there. Okay, so, let us compute. So, I need to compute the sum for all elements of W of, well, it is right there. So, I will now split this sum. I will write every element of W uniquely as something in W naught times something in T. Okay. So, that is the basic strategy. So, let us do that here. Write this sum as a sum. Let me call W as sigma times T gamma, that's my split into W naught and into this element of T. So now I will run over all sigma in W naught and I will run over all gamma in the lattice M. Okay. So I am thinking of W as this product. So I am splitting it off into two pieces, but the pieces are unique. So I might as well just run over all possibilities for the first piece and all possibilities for the second. So it's this double sum of, let's see what are all the terms. It's minus 1 to the length of, or let me just call this the sine of this product sigma T gamma, but sine it's a homomorphism on the Weyl group. Okay, this is sort of one of the earlier exercises, at least for the finite Weyl group. So sine is a homomorphism. It's nothing but the determinant of that map when you think of it as acting naturally on that vector space. So it's a homomorphism. I can split it off like that times e to the W rho minus rho, but W is sigma T gamma rho minus rho. Okay, so that's what I need to compute. So I need to compute this. Okay, so there are a few more steps. We need to sort of try and get a handle on these various ingredients. So let's sort of try and do it one at a time. So the first observation, what can you say about the sine of T gamma? So let's go back to sort of a couple of lectures ago when we defined these various things. So how did we define T theta? So recall, sort of from 2 lectures ago, we started out like this. We said this is the element that occurs naturally. We defined it like this, right? We said it's a reflection S alpha naught times S theta. Okay, so what's the sign of T theta? 1, because a reflection always has sign minus 1. Right? This is something we saw again before. A reflection has it leaves a hyperplane fixed and just maps one vector to its negative. So a reflection always has sign minus 1, and so it's a product of 2 reflections. So in fact, the sign of T theta is 1. So T theta always has even length, by the way, as a consequence of this. Sort of a interesting fact that these translations will always have even length. Okay, the sign is 1. Now what about T gamma? Well, T gamma can be obtained. How was it obtained? You would take T theta, look at its various Weyl conjugates. Right? So when you conjugate an element, you look at W T theta, W inverse. Of course, its sign doesn't change because you're just conjugating. Right? It will be the sign of W times the sign of W inverse times 1. So the sign of this would remain 1. That's the sign of T W theta. So everything in the Weyl orbit of theta would have sign 1. And then you multiply those things together to get T gamma for gamma in the lattice. So a general T gamma is just a product of various of these elements of these forms, T theta or T of some Weyl orbit of some element in the Weyl orbit of theta. So therefore it's a product of 1s, so it's always 1. Okay. So the translation subgroup is actually even. All elements in it are even because they are actually obtained from products of 2 reflections by sort of transformations which don't really change the sign. That's the first observation. So this thing can be removed. But now we still need to compute this main term. Let's start with T gamma of rho. So, and in fact, we know what gamma is, right? It's all n, it's of the form n times alpha. But anyway, for now, let's keep it as T gamma of rho. By definition, from that sort of magic formula from last time was rho plus rho delta theta minus rho theta delta minus half gamma gamma rho delta delta. Okay, so this was that exponential of that tau, and these are the first order term, this is a second order term, right. So, I in some sense this is can't really avoid this step, I think. So, this is the formula for T gamma of rho for whatever reason. So, here is the thing, and now we need to apply the sigma on it, sigma T gamma on it. So, we have sigma T gamma rho minus rho, right? That is what I am trying to compute, is I act sigma on this side and then subtract rho. So, it will be sigma rho minus rho plus rho delta times sigma acting on gamma minus rho gamma times delta, but sigma delta is delta, nothing, no change there. Because delta is fixed by all elements of the while group, and then okay, so both these terms are just the same, nothing really happens to them. Okay, good. Minus half gamma rho delta. Okay, again, so what's rho here? As we said before, we don't really care. It's some element whose inner product with alpha I check is 1 for all the alpha I checks. So, now observe, so what is rho? Think of it as follows: rho alpha, okay, rho alpha I is 1 for I equals 0 and 1. Okay, I should actually put a check there, but in this case, alpha 1 has norm 2. And similarly, alpha naught, if you compute, also has the same norm. So, they are both of norm 2. So, I can just forget the 2's there. Right? This is an equivalent description of rho. So, check this for yourself. Rho alpha is actually 1 for I equals 0 and 1, and this actually implies that rho delta is 2. So, I claim given this, rho delta I know is 2 in this case. Okay. Why is that? Well, recall we are doing SL2. So, in general, here is the formula that alpha naught is delta minus theta. This is what happens in general. Okay. It is just a very simple computation which I will just quickly go through, but in this case, because we are doing SL2, it is delta minus alpha 1, right. So, in general, if I think of what is delta, it is alpha naught plus theta. So, in general, delta is nothing but alpha naught plus theta, but in this particular case, it is alpha naught plus alpha 1. Okay. So, if you write delta in terms of the simple roots, it just turns out to be the sum of the two simple roots in this case. And since rho was 1 with each simple root, with delta it would be 2, because it is rho alpha naught plus rho alpha 1. Okay. So, all I have done is just sort of use the property of rho that this thing holds. So, again you will notice that that is all you need, you do not really need anything further about rho. Okay, so let us see, let us plug that in. So, what do we get? Sigma T gamma rho minus rho is, I do not think I can do much about this, sigma rho minus rho plus rho delta was twice sigma gamma, okay, good, minus a bunch of things involving delta. So, let us just keep the delta out there, delta times some quadratic function. So, the first term is sort of linear, plus half gamma gamma, half gamma gamma, rho delta is 2, so this goes away. Okay. So, that is my formula for what this does, and let's see what further simplification can I do there. Let me write it as sigma times sigma of rho plus gamma, rho plus 2 gamma. So, it is sigma of rho plus 2 gamma minus rho, okay, and then minus the terms with delta. So, minus delta multiplied by rho gamma plus gamma gamma. Okay. So, we sort of really have to dirtier hands here. But in some sense, like I sort of mentioned at the very end of that lecture, it's this quadratic term here which is sort of, you know, the key thing. If you notice what the sum side of the Jacobi triple product identity, or in fact any of those other eta function identities involved, it was always q raised to some quadratic function of j. It was j into 3j minus 1 over 2, or j into j plus 1 over 2, and so on and so forth. So always some quadratic function of j, and that's exactly this term. So this is going to be the origin of that quadratic term, and we finally trace it back to that formula for T gamma which had that quadratic term here. Okay, so we've done this. Let's see. I've forgotten where we were. Okay. So we now need to plug that into this formula. So let's see. The sum side therefore equals sum over all elements of W naught, sum over all gamma in M, sine of sigma. Okay, the sine of T gamma is a 1 times e to the, let's see what we have, sigma of rho plus 2 gamma minus rho times e to the minus delta times rho gamma plus gamma gamma. Okay, so I wrote everything out. And I guess beyond this point, we just have to unravel it for the case of SL2. Okay, we've just got to figure out what all these things become in this particular situation. So observe in this case, so recall we are doing SL2 here. Therefore, the sum becomes a sum where sigma is either the identity or the reflection about alpha 1. The sum over M becomes, you think of gamma as n times alpha 1. This is now the sum over all n. So that's that lattice times the sine of sigma, of course, sine of sigma is plus or minus e to the, let's see, it's rho plus 2n alpha 1 sigma of that minus rho e to the minus delta, let's see, rho times n alpha 1 plus gamma gamma, which is n square times alpha 1 alpha 1. Okay, that's what we get. So let's see what it becomes for sigma equals identity and sigma equals minus identity. I'm sorry, and the other reflection. So it's a sum over all n in Z. So I'm going to do sigma equals identity first. The sign is 1. The thing on top is e to the 2n alpha 1. E to the minus delta, let's see, rho with alpha 1, remember, was 1. So again, the only property of rho I need is rho alpha 1 is 1. So this is n plus n square. So e to the minus delta n square plus n. So notice the quadratic term again. So this is for sigma equals identity. Then for the reflection, the sign will become negative. So it's minus the sum for all n in Z. Alpha 1 is 2, correct. 2n. No, 2n square. Okay. And this now becomes sine of sigma is minus this reflection. How does it act on rho plus 2n alpha 1? Well, on 2n alpha 1, S alpha 1 will map it to minus. And on and then for S alpha 1, if you compute sigma rho minus rho, we just did that computation, right? It will give you minus alpha 1. That's it. So if you sort of unravel this term, there will be a minus 2n, and then the sigma rho minus rho will also give you a minus 1. So it's minus of 2n plus 1 alpha 1. And then this guy would just be the same thing, minus delta n plus 2n square. Okay, and now let's use our usual choice of variables. Q denotes e to the minus delta. Q was e to the minus delta, and we said Z was e to the minus alpha 1. Right. So let's try and match this up. This now becomes summation all n in z. This is now q to the 2n square plus n. This is now z to the minus 2n minus z to the minus plus 2n plus 1. Okay, that's what I get for the sum side of the Jacobi identity. So the product, Jacobi triple product. So the while denominator formula therefore implies that the Jacobi triple product, the product side, must equal this. Okay, and even though it looks sort of different from the form in which Jacobi first wrote it, it's actually equivalent. Okay, so what's the form in which we wrote it? I mean, there's a reason why we are writing it in this form, because firstly we want to do it in general, right? And then there'll be some, so you'll see in a minute. So you can simplify this to bring it into that form, but that's probably not, that manipulation is not something you might be able to do in general. And secondly, so in general, one starts with this, and you can actually already see, well, okay, I'll say this. So if gamma is in M, then you think of this gamma as now interchanging the order of the summation. You forget this term. Now the inside looks like a sum over the finite while group sine sigma times e to the sigma something plus rho minus rho, right? So this again looks like the numerator of the while character formula. It looks like the while numerator for the finite while group. Okay, so that's sort of the key observation that one will want to make, that the numerator of the finite while group somehow occurs in this formula, where you think of lambda as being this element 2 gamma, and that will be the starting point of the general thing. But let's see why this is the same as the Jacobi identity, just to sort of sync up perfectly with that. Jacobi identity was what? Can someone help me with this? Minus 1 to the n. Q to the n times n minus 1 over 2, z to the, right, minus 1 to the n, that's right, right? Is this right? This was the Jacobi triple product. Okay, so let's see, how do we try and get this and this to equal each other? We sort of need to make some, call m as something in terms of n. So for example, let's call m as, now we need that power of z, so let's call m as minus 2n, for example, in this first summation. Okay, I might need to split the sums again. In the first sum, if you think of m as minus 2n, so let's just try and do this quickly. So in the first sum, I will call m as minus 2n. So it now becomes a sum overall m in 2z, it's only over the even numbers, of q to the, let's see, what's 2n square plus n? Let's think of it as 4n square plus 2n divided by 2. So it's 4n square plus 2n divided by 2. Okay, so that's nothing but m square minus m over 2. Okay, so if I change, I'm only doing the first sum, only this fellow. So that's m square minus m, is that right, or plus m? Looks like minus, no? Okay, minus m over 2, and this is now z to the m, right? But it's only running over the even numbers. Okay, in the second sum, I will sort of call m as the other thing, 2n plus 1. Okay, so minus, it's now the sum over all odd numbers, for all odd integers of, at least the power of z is clear, it's z to the m again. But now what's 4n square plus 2n over 2? It's 2n plus 1 cos square, 4n square plus 2n plus 1, 4n square plus 4n plus 1. I guess I have to do this, let's see. So we want to know what is 4n square plus 2n over 2 in terms of m. So, this is first m square, 4n plus 4n square plus 4n. So, it is minus 2n. Okay, let me subtract minus 2n minus 1 over 2. Okay, great. That is n. Okay, so magically you get the same thing again, q to the m into m minus 1 over 2. But now m is only running over the odd numbers here and over the even numbers there, and you can put them both together, and that is exactly the formula. This just says it is a sum over the even numbers of this minus the sum over the odd numbers of this. Okay. So, it is exactly Jacobi triple product, but comes in a slightly different form, and there is a reason for doing it this way, because that is what will generalize to any setup. Okay. So, I guess even if you don't really get the general calculation in all its entirety, I think this is already the prototypical calculation. This is exactly, if you wish, this is really McDonald's eta function identities. The computation that we just did is essentially the typical computation for what the eta function identity is. So, in the end, remember there was one further step when we did eta function. We also had to set z going to 1, right? When we did when we derived that Jacobi's identity for the cube of the eta of the phi function. There's something more you needed to do. Take the product side, put z equals 1, and then you got that identity, which was called the eta function. I mean, that was the identity for eta. So, there's one further step left, which is you must sort of divide by that 1 minus z and put that thing equals 1, and that's also already sort of set up here, because the sum which I erased, which I said is you see the numerator, the while numerator in there. It's a sum over all sigma in W naught minus 1 to the length of sigma, and then it looks like sigma of something plus rho minus rho e to the. This was the while numerator, right? And I said the while numerator occurs in the sum side in some sense. But then when you attempt to do that, dividing by 1 minus z and putting z equals 0, the corresponding thing would be you will have to divide by the while denominator for the finite while group, where now you are only dividing overall, where now this is only for the finite while group. Okay. So, that computation which we did, dividing by 1 minus z, now corresponds to also throwing in the while denominator here, okay, which means the entire while character formula itself appears now as a sub of this, and now you need to set the variables equal to 1. Right? You need to take that limit in order to get the eta function identity, and taking the while character formula and setting those variables limit going to 1 gives you the dimension of that module. That is the while dimension formula. Okay. So, in that limiting setup, this is the computation which Sendamarai did with those derivations and so on. So, when you sort of let these variables go to 1, this fellow here will give you the dimension of the corresponding module. Okay. So, therefore, the final eta function identity is going to have a form which looks like some power of that eta, this d, which is the dimension of the underlying the algebra, is a sum of over all alpha ranging over that lattice M, okay, which is the long root lattice of, there will be a power of q which has a quadratic term in alpha. Okay. So, this is in fact going to be, it's alpha or something quadratic in alpha. So, let us just say it's alpha over 2. So, if I write it that way, then it's not quite that same lattice, it's a translated lattice, and what you will get here will be the dimension of some representation of the underlying finite dimensional Lie algebra. Okay. And this is the representation whose highest weight is actually h alpha or in this case 2 alpha is what we got there. Okay. It's not a dominant weight anymore, but the way you interpret this is to say, okay, if it's not dominant, then you bring it into the dominant chamber by applying some while conjugate, and then you will incur a sign while you do that. So, this number is now no longer, it's the signed dimension in some sense. It's sometimes positive or sometimes negative, sometimes 0 even. Okay, anyway, I guess I will sort of finish up the last few details on during my last lecture on Saturday.